The champagne had gone to my head. That's the only explanation for why I raised my paddle when the auctioneer called out, "Do I hear 100,000 euros?" It was supposed to be a joke, a gesture of defiance aimed at my smirking ex-boyfriend 3 tables away, who had been making increasingly obnoxious bids all evening to impress his new girlfriend. A way to show that I wasn't the broke, desperate woman he'd left 6 months ago, that I had moved on, moved up, and become someone who could casually throw around 6-figure sums at a charity auction. Except I couldn't. I absolutely, definitely could not afford 100,000 euros. My entire savings account contained maybe 8,000, accumulated through 18 months of grinding work at the consulting firm, where I had finally started to rebuild my career after the divorce had destroyed everything. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Sold. To the young lady in blue, for 100,000 euros. Congratulations on winning an exclusive evening with Mr. Bruno Fontana. The applause that followed was deafening. Around me, Naples's elite, the wealthy, the powerful, the dangerously connected, were clapping and smiling and turning to look at me with expressions ranging from amusement to envy to something that looked almost like pity. And at the front of the ballroom, standing on the stage in a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than my car, was Bruno Fontana himself. I had noticed him earlier in the evening, the way you couldn't help but notice a predator in a room full of prey. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that managed to be both classically handsome and vaguely threatening. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes so dark they were almost black. He looked like he had stepped out of a Renaissance painting. Powerful, magnetic, dangerous. He was also, according to the whispered conversations I'd overheard, one of the most influential men in southern Italy. Bruno Fontana controlled shipping routes, owned half of Naples's commercial real estate, and had connections that reached from City Hall to the Vatican. He was also, though this was never explicitly stated, deeply involved in the kind of business that operated in the shadows between the legal and the criminal. In other words, he was precisely the kind of man a sensible woman avoided at all costs. And I had just bought a date with him, for money I absolutely did not have. The panic hit me in waves. Cold sweat prickled at the back of my neck. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to set down my champagne glass before I dropped it. Around me, people were congratulating me, making jokes about how I must have really wanted that date, speculating about what an evening with Bruno Fontana might entail. And Marco, my ex, was staring at me with his mouth literally hanging open. His girlfriend, a blonde, 23-year-old Instagram influencer named Chiara, looked torn between impressed and furious. "Claudia," Marco said, pushing back his chair and approaching my table. What the hell was that? "Do you have any idea who that man is?" "Yes," I lied, trying to sound confident. "I know exactly who he is." "And you just casually dropped 100,000 euros on a date with him?" "Where did you even get that kind of money?" It was a fair question. During our marriage, Marco had controlled all our finances, doling out an allowance like I was a child, while he built his tech startup with money I didn't know came from his family trust. When we divorced, he'd made sure I walked away with nothing, claiming that since I hadn't directly contributed to the business, I had no claim to any assets. Never mind that I had worked 60-hour weeks at a job I hated to pay our rent while he pursued his dream. Never mind that I had typed his business plans, designed his presentations, and introduced him to half his early investors. According to the divorce settlement, I deserved nothing. "That's none of your business anymore," I said, lifting my chin. "You made it very clear when you left that my finances were my own problem. So here I am, solving my problems. By throwing money at a charity auction to impress people? That's pathetic, Claudia. You're trying so hard to prove you've moved on. But everyone can see you're—" "Excuse me." The voice came from directly behind me, low and smooth and carrying an authority that made Marco's words die in his throat. I turned to find Bruno Fontana standing there, even more imposing up close. He was perhaps 6'3", with shoulders that strained against his custom suit jacket. Up close, I could see that his eyes weren't purely black. They held flecks of amber near the pupil, like embers in charcoal. "Mr. Fontana," Marco stammered, suddenly looking much younger than his 32 years. "I was just congratulating Claudia on her winning bid." "Were you?" Bruno's tone was polite, but there was steel underneath. It sounded more like you were questioning her financial decisions. Which seems inappropriate given that you're... He glanced at Kiara, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. Otherwise occupied. The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable. Marco's face flushed red. I was simply concerned as a friend. Claudia doesn't need your concern, Bruno interrupted gently. He turned those dark, penetrating eyes on me, and I felt pinned like a butterfly to a board. Does she? I should have stayed silent. Should have let him handle Marco, who clearly wasn't going to argue with someone like Bruno Fontana. But something in me, pride or stupidity, or the lingering champagne, made me meet his gaze directly. No, I said clearly. I don't need his concern. I made my bid intentionally, and I'm fully prepared to honor it. It was a complete lie. I was in no way prepared to honor a €100,000 commitment. But admitting that in front of Marco, in front of all these people, in front of Bruno Fontana himself, that would be humiliation beyond what I could bear. Bruno's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Amusement, maybe, or interest. I'm glad to hear it, he said. Perhaps we should discuss the details of our evening together. Privately. He extended his hand, and I realized with a jolt that he was asking me to leave with him. Right now, in front of everyone. Marco looked like he might actually protest, but one glance at Bruno's face made him think better of it. He retreated to his table, muttering something to Kiara that I couldn't hear. I placed my hand in Bruno's. His palm was warm and calloused, not the soft hands of someone who only signed papers. These were hands that had done physical work, or violence, or both. He guided me through the ballroom with a possessive hand on my lower back, and I felt every eye in the room tracking our movement. We walked past tables of Naples elite, past the stage where other auction items were being presented, and through a side door into a quiet corridor lined with artwork. Only when the door closed behind us, muffling the noise of the auction, did Bruno release me. I immediately missed his touch, which was absurd and dangerous. So, he said, leaning against the wall with deceptive casualness. That was quite a performance. Performance? The bid. The confidence. The way you shut down your ex-boyfriend. Very impressive. His eyes studied me with unnerving intensity. Also completely fake. My stomach dropped. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. He pushed off from the wall and moved closer, until I could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive with notes of leather and cedar. You don't have €100,000. You made that bid impulsively, probably to prove something to the man who's now staring at us through the window with a very entertaining expression of shock. I glanced toward the ballroom. Marco was indeed watching us. His face pressed almost comically against the glass of the door's window. How do you know I don't have the money? I asked, trying to sound offended rather than terrified. Because I make it my business to know things. And in the 30 seconds between your winning bid and my arrival at your table, I had someone pull your financial records. He said it so casually, as if invading someone's privacy was as normal as checking the weather. You have €8,342 in your savings account. Respectable for someone rebuilding after a divorce, but nowhere near sufficient to cover your bid. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's illegal. You can't just... I can. I did. And now we have an interesting situation. He tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. You made a very public commitment that you can't honor, which means you're either going to have to admit you made a drunken mistake in front of all those people, including your ex-husband, or you're going to have to find another way to pay your debt. It's not a debt, I said weakly. It's a charity donation. I'm sure the organization will understand if I explain. The organization is expecting €100,000 in your name by the end of the week. If you default, it will be noticed, discussed. Your professional reputation will suffer. He moved even closer, and I found myself backed against the wall. Your ex-husband will hear about it. He'll know you were bluffing. Is that what you want? No, God, no. That was the last thing I wanted. I had spent 6 months rebuilding my dignity, my career, my sense of self-worth after Marco had discarded me like I was worthless. The idea of him knowing I'd failed, that I'd made a fool of myself trying to compete with his new wealth, it was unbearable. What do you suggest? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Bruno smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just realized the seal was injured. I suggest we make a deal. I'll cover your bid. the full 100,000 euros. The charity gets its donation, you maintain your pride, and your ex-husband continues to wonder how you became so successful. And in exchange? In exchange, you honor the terms of the auction. One exclusive evening with me. Except we'll do it on my terms, not the sanitized dinner and conversation version the charity was advertising. You'll spend an entire weekend with me, at my estate in Amalfi, and you'll fulfill whatever role I require of you during that time. The suggestion was so outrageous, so dangerous, that I actually laughed. You're insane. I'm not going to spend a weekend with you doing God knows what in exchange for saving your reputation and your pride, he finished calmly. And let's be clear about what I'm asking. I'm not propositioning you for sex, though if that happens naturally, I certainly won't object. I'm asking you to play a role. I have business associates visiting that weekend who expect to see me settled, domesticated, and committed to someone. You'll pretend to be my girlfriend. We'll be seen together, you'll be charming and elegant, and at the end of the weekend you'll walk away with your dignity intact and your debt paid. I stared at him, trying to find the trap in his words. There had to be a trap. Men like Bruno Fontana didn't offer help without expecting something in return. Why me? I asked. You could have any woman in that ballroom play this role. Why choose someone who can't even afford her own bid? Because you have something the others don't, Bruno said. Authenticity. When you raised that paddle, you weren't trying to catch my attention or curry favor or position yourself socially. You were trying to prove something to yourself and to the man who hurt you. That kind of genuine emotion can't be faked. And the women in that ballroom who would jump at the chance to spend a weekend with me, they all want something. Status, connection, money. Their performance would be calculated. Yours will be real. It won't be real, I protested. It'll be exactly as fake as theirs. I'll be pretending, but you'll be pretending for different reasons. Not to get something from me, but to avoid losing something you've worked hard to rebuild. That desperation will make you more convincing. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the gesture oddly intimate. Besides, I like you. You have fire. You stood up to me when most people wouldn't dare. That's refreshing. This is insane, I repeated. But I could feel my resolve weakening. Because what choice did I have? I couldn't pay the 100,000 euros. I couldn't default without massive professional and personal consequences. And the idea of Marco finding out I'd failed, that I'd been posturing, it made me physically ill. It's practical, Bruno corrected. I need a convincing girlfriend for a weekend. You need someone to cover your impulsive bid. We help each other. Where's the insanity in that? I stopped myself before saying the word. Gangster. Criminal. Mafioso. Whatever label applied to men who controlled Naples through a combination of legitimate business and shadow operations. You're dangerous, I finished. Yes, he agreed readily. But not to you. You're far more valuable to me as a willing participant than as someone I've coerced. I give you my word that you'll be safe this weekend. No one will hurt you. And when it's over, you walk away free and clear. His word, as if that meant something. As if promises from a man like him had any weight. But I looked into those dark eyes and saw something that surprised me. Honesty. He meant what he was saying. At least he meant it in this moment. Whether that would still be true once I was isolated in his Amalfi estate was another question entirely. I need to think about it, I said. No. The word was delivered with finality. You need to decide now. Either you agree to my terms, or you go back into that ballroom and announce that you made a mistake and can't honor your bid. Your choice, Claudia. But choose quickly. My patience has limits. The use of my name, which I hadn't given him, was another reminder of how thoroughly he'd invaded my privacy. He knew who I was, knew my financial situation, probably knew about the divorce, about Marco's betrayal, about the 18 months of struggle to rebuild my life. He knew everything, and I knew almost nothing about him except his reputation. It should have terrified me. It did terrify me, but it also made me angry. Fine, I said, the decision surprising even me as the word left my mouth. I'll do it. One weekend. I'll play your girlfriend or whatever role you need, but I have conditions. One dark eyebrow rose. Conditions? Yes. First, you keep your word about safety. I'm not going to be pressured into anything I don't explicitly agree to. Second, at the end of the weekend, we're done. You don't contact me. Don't involve me in any of your business. Don't suddenly decide you want to extend the arrangement. Third, no one can know this is fake. Especially not Marco. If he finds out you paid my bid because I couldn't afford it, the deal is off, and you can keep your money. Bruno's expression shifted from amusement to something that looked almost like respect. You drive a hard bargain for someone with no leverage. I have one piece of leverage. You said you need someone authentic, someone who can convincingly play the role. I can do that, but only if I feel safe enough to relax into the performance. If I'm terrified and defensive the entire weekend, your business associates will see right through it. I was making it up as I went along, but it sounded logical, reasonable. I felt like I had some power in this negotiation rather than being completely at his mercy. Bruno studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he extended his hand. Deal. 1 weekend, complete safety and total discretion. In exchange, you play the role of my devoted girlfriend with enough authenticity to convince even the most perceptive people. Do we have an agreement? I looked at his extended hand, strong, scarred along the knuckles, belonging to a man who could probably destroy my life with a phone call. Then I thought about Marco's smug face, about the humiliation of defaulting on my bid, about returning to the life of careful poverty I'd been living. I shook his hand. His grip was firm and warm, and he held on just a fraction longer than necessary. Good, he said softly. Then let me be very clear about what you've agreed to, Claudia. Starting this moment, you belong to me for the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks? I tried to pull my hand back, but he held it firmly. You said a weekend. I said you'd spend a weekend at my estate. But preparation is required. You'll need clothes, coaching on my background and business, and time to learn how to move convincingly in my world. 2 weeks total, the weekend itself, plus the preparation time leading up to it. That's not what we agreed to. It's exactly what we agreed to. You agreed to play a convincing role. That requires preparation. Unless you think you can show up at my estate and immediately pass as someone who's been in my life for months. He had a point, damn him. I couldn't just show up and wing it. These business associates, he mentioned, would be watching for any sign of deception. Fine, 2 weeks. But the same conditions apply. Understood. He finally released my hand, and I resisted the urge to rub feeling back into my fingers. We start tomorrow. I'll send a car for you at 9 a.m. Pack enough clothes for a week. We'll be staying at my apartment in the city during the preparation phase. I have a job, I protested. I can't just take 2 weeks off without notice. Yes, you can. I've already arranged it. At my stunned expression, he smiled. I told you, I move quickly when I want something. Your employer received a very generous consulting contract this afternoon. In exchange, they've agreed to loan you out for a special project. Fully paid, of course. Your salary continues, and you'll receive a substantial bonus for the inconvenience. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. He had arranged all of this. The financial investigation, the employment arrangements, probably a dozen other details I didn't even know about, in the time it took me to make one impulsive bid. You planned this, I said slowly. You knew I couldn't afford the bid before I even made it. You wanted this to happen. Bruno's smile was enigmatic. Let's say I saw an opportunity and positioned myself to take advantage of it. When you raised that paddle, I'll admit I was intrigued. A woman bidding a fortune she clearly doesn't have, to prove a point to her ex-husband. That's either foolishness or bravery. I wanted to find out which. And what's your conclusion? Both, he said. You're foolishly brave or bravely foolish. Either way, you're interesting, and I haven't been interested in much lately. Before I could respond to that unsettling statement, the ballroom door opened, and Marco stuck his head out. Claudia, is everything all right? You've been gone for a while. Bruno turned to him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everything is perfect. Claudia and I were finalizing the details of our evening together. Or rather, our weekend together. I've convinced her to extend our time beyond the single date the auction promised. Marco's face went through several interesting color changes. A weekend? Claudia, are you sure that's appropriate? Safe? Any of your business? I interrupted, channeling the confidence I'd felt when I made that ridiculous bid. I'm perfectly sure, Marco. Mr. Fontana has been nothing but a gentleman. Bruno corrected, his hand finding the small of my back again. If we're going to be spending intimate time together, you should use my first name, Tesoro. Tesoro. Treasure. The endearment was delivered casually, but I felt its impact. Marco's eyes widened. Behind him, Chiara had appeared, her phone already out, no doubt documenting this moment for her Instagram followers. Right. Bruno. I forced myself to relax into his touch, to act as if this were normal. Like powerful, dangerous men called me treasure every day. I should probably get back to the auction. People will wonder where we've gone." "Let them wonder," Bruno said. "But you're right, we should make an appearance. Show them that you're very pleased with your winning bid." He guided me back into the ballroom, his hand never leaving my back, and I felt every eye turn toward us. The whispers started immediately. Speculation about what had happened in that corridor, about the nature of our relationship, about whether this was the beginning of something scandalous. We returned to my table, but Bruno didn't leave. Instead, he pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down, making it clear to everyone in the room that I was now under his protection. Or his control. The line between the two seemed very thin. "Tell me about yourself," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "I know the facts, your age, your job, your divorce, but I want to know who you really are, Claudia. What drives you? What do you fear? Why do you care? Because if I'm going to convince people we're in a relationship, I need to know you. The real you, not the polished professional version you show the world." It was a fair point, though the idea of opening up to Bruno Fontana felt dangerous, but I had agreed to this arrangement. I might as well play my part convincingly. "I'm a senior analyst at Moretti Consulting," I said. "I specialize in market research and competitive analysis. I'm good at finding patterns, at seeing what others miss. It's probably why I survived my divorce. I learned to see Marco's lies before he could fully execute them." "But not before he'd already damaged you," Bruno observed. "No, not before that." I took a sip of champagne, needing the fortification. I was 23 when we met. Fresh out of university, idealistic, convinced that love and hard work could overcome anything. He was 26, charismatic, and full of big dreams about the tech company he wanted to build. I believed in him. I worked terrible jobs to pay our bills while he pursued his vision, and when his company finally succeeded, when the money started coming in, he decided I was no longer the right partner for his new status. "So he traded you in for a younger model," Bruno said, his eyes flicking toward Marco and Chiara across the room. "Classic. Predictable. Pathetic. That's one way to describe it. And now you're working yourself to exhaustion at a consulting firm, rebuilding your career, proving you don't need him. Also classic. Also predictable." He turned those dark eyes back to me. "But tonight you did something unpredictable. You made a bid you couldn't afford to watch him squirm. That's when you became interesting." "I'm not interesting," I protested. "I'm just stubborn. Stubbornness is underrated. Some of the most successful people I know are too stubborn to accept failure." He paused as a waiter brought us fresh champagne. "What else should I know about you? Hobbies? Passions? Secret talents?" "I paint," I admitted. "Not well, but it relaxes me. And I read obsessively. History mostly. Biographies of people who survived impossible situations." "Looking for blueprints for your own survival," Bruno noted. "That's very practical. What else?" "I speak 3 languages. Italian, obviously, English, and French. I grew up in Rome but moved to Naples for university and never left. My parents are both deceased. I have one sister in Milan whom I barely speak to because she sided with Marco during the divorce. And I hate olives, which makes me a terrible Italian." Bruno laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face from intimidating to almost approachable. "Hating olives is forgivable. Family betrayal is less so. Your sister sounds like someone I'd dislike." "Most people like her," I said. "She's charming and successful and married to a banker. She's everything I was supposed to be and failed at." "You didn't fail. You were betrayed. There's a difference." The certainty in his voice surprised me. Most people, when they heard about my divorce, assumed I must have done something wrong. Must have been complex, demanding, or somehow inadequate. But Bruno framed it as Marco's failure, not mine. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "I'm not saying it to be kind," he replied. "I'm saying it because it's true. Men like your ex-husband are parasites. They attach themselves to strong women, drain them of energy and resources, and then move on when they've extracted everything useful. You're better off without him. I know that intellectually, but emotionally, I trailed off, not sure why I was being so honest with this dangerous stranger. Emotionally, I still feel like I failed. Like if I'd been better somehow, prettier, smarter, more successful, he wouldn't have left." "That's the poison he put in your mind," Bruno said, his voice hardening. "And it's exactly the thinking we're going to eliminate over the next 2 weeks. When you're with me, you won't question your worth. You won't apologize for taking up space. You'll act like the valuable, intelligent woman you actually are. Understood? It should have sounded arrogant, controlling, but instead it sounded almost protective. Like he was giving me permission to be confident in a way I hadn't allowed myself since the divorce. Understood, I said. We stayed at the auction for another hour. Bruno introduced me to various people. Business associates, politicians, cultural figures, and each time, he presented me as someone important. Someone worth knowing. His hand never left my back, a constant reminder of his presence and his claim. When Marco tried to approach again, Bruno shut him down with a single look. By the time we left the hotel, climbing into the back of a sleek black car that had been waiting at the curb, I felt drunk on something more potent than champagne. Power, maybe, or the illusion of it. I'll have my assistant contact you tomorrow morning with details, Bruno said as the car pulled away from the hotel. The car will collect you at 9. Bring comfortable clothes and something elegant for dinners. Everything else will be provided. Where exactly are we going? My apartment first. It's in Chiaia, near the Villa Comunale. You'll stay there during the preparation phase. Then, at the end of the week, we'll drive to Amalfi for the weekend with my business associates. And what exactly am I preparing for? What kind of business associates are these? Bruno's expression became more guarded. The less you know about my business, the better. What matters is that these are important people who expect to see me settled with someone appropriate. You'll need to know my background, my preferences, and the kind of relationship history that would make sense. We'll spend the week building that narrative. A fake history, I clarified. Yes, but it will be detailed and consistent. By the time we reach Amalfi, you'll know me well enough that no one will question our relationship. The car pulled up in front of a modest apartment building in Vomero. My neighborhood, I realized with surprise. Bruno had known exactly where I lived without asking. Sleep well, Claudia, he said as his driver opened my door. Tomorrow your old life ends and a new one begins. I suggest you make peace with that tonight. And if I change my mind? I asked, even though we both knew it was too late for that. Then you'll default on your auction bid, lose your professional reputation, and give your ex-husband the satisfaction of knowing you failed. But you won't change your mind. You're too stubborn for that. He was right, damn him. I climbed out of the car and walked to my building without looking back, but I could feel his eyes on me the entire way. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the evening, the impulsive bid, Bruno's appearance, the deal we'd struck. I had agreed to spend 2 weeks with a man I knew nothing about except his reputation for danger. I had decided to pretend to be his girlfriend, to enter his world, to play a role that could expose me to God knew what risks. But I had also agreed to something else, something I was only beginning to understand. I had decided to stop being invisible, to stop playing it safe, to step into a life that was bigger and more dangerous and more exciting than anything I'd experienced in my careful, controlled existence. At 8:30 the next morning, my phone rang. An unknown number. Buongiorno, signorina Rossi. This is Gabriella, Mr. Fontana's personal assistant. The car will arrive at your building at 9 o'clock as discussed. Please be ready. I'm not... I started to say I wasn't ready, that I needed more time, but Gabriella had already disconnected. At precisely 9 o'clock, a knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find a young woman in an elegant suit, perfectly coiffed, holding a tablet and a garment bag. The space smelled faintly of citrus and something darker. Leather, maybe, or polished wood. It smelled like money and control, and a life lived without apology. Welcome, Gabriella said, setting my suitcase near the entryway. This will be your home for the next week. My home. The word felt absurd in a place where a single chair probably cost more than everything I owned combined. Where is he? I asked. Asleep, she replied calmly. Mr. Fontana keeps late hours. He doesn't like to be disturbed before 10 unless there's an emergency. You'll have time to settle in. She handed me a slim folder. This contains your schedule for the week, basic information about Mr. Fontana's public life, and guidelines for conduct. Please read it carefully. Guidelines, I echoed. Yes. Nothing unreasonable. What to call him in different contexts, which events you'll attend, what personal details you're expected to know by heart. We'll go over everything this afternoon. I flipped the folder open despite myself. Inside were neatly organized sections. Background, relationship narrative, public expectations, private boundaries, Private boundaries. That caught my attention, Gabriella noticed. Mr. Fontana was very clear on that point. You are not to be touched, pressured, or compromised in any way without your explicit consent. If that line is crossed, you come to me immediately. Or you leave. I looked up at her, surprised. You'd help me leave? Yes, she said simply. Because if you stay against your will, you become a liability. And Mr. Fontana doesn't tolerate liabilities. That wasn't comforting exactly. But it was something. She gestured toward the living area. Coffee? Breakfast? The kitchen is stocked. You'll want to eat. Today will be long. I'd like coffee, I said. Black. She inclined her head approvingly and moved toward the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. I wandered toward the windows, my heels clicking softly against stone floors, and looked out at the bay. Naples sprawled below, chaotic and alive, utterly indifferent to the fact that my life had just tilted off its axis. A week ago, my biggest worry had been whether I could afford to replace my laptop before it finally died. Now, I was standing in Bruno Fontana's penthouse, wearing a dress he'd chosen, living under rules he'd written, preparing to impersonate his girlfriend for men powerful enough to reshape cities. You're staring like someone deciding whether to jump, a voice said behind me. I turned. Bruno stood barefoot on the marble floor, dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled up. Without the armor of a suit, he looked more dangerous, not less. Relaxed, unguarded, entirely at home. I was wondering how long it would take you to appear, I said. You're punctual. I appreciate that. His gaze traveled over me, unhurried, assessing. The dress works. It's not mine. No, he agreed, but it suits you. Gabriella set a cup of coffee on the counter and discreetly withdrew, leaving us alone. Silence stretched, not awkward but heavy. So, Bruno said at last, this is where you decide whether you're going to fight me every step of the way or work with me. I'm not fighting, I said. I'm surviving. A slow smile curved his mouth. Good. Survivors are adaptable. He moved closer, stopping a careful distance away, not crowding me, not touching. A deliberate choice. Let's be clear, Claudia, he said. I don't want obedience. I want credibility. My associates will watch you closely. They'll look for hesitation, inconsistency, fear. If you act like a woman who belongs at my side, they'll believe it. If you act like a hostage, they won't. And if they don't? I asked. Then this weekend becomes much more complicated than either of us wants. There it was, the threat, delivered softly. I took a breath. Then teach me. His eyes sharpened, something like approval flickering there. That, he said, is exactly the right answer. He reached for the folder in my hands and tapped the first page. By tonight, you'll know how we met, how long we've been together, what annoys me, what I pretend not to care about, and why I haven't married you yet. And why haven't you? I asked. Because, he said smoothly, you're independent, stubborn, and unwilling to be owned, which makes you irresistible and dangerous. I met his gaze, heart pounding. Sounds like a terrible match. He smiled again, slow and sharp. Yes, he said, which is why everyone will believe it. You hated the dessert wine, pretended to like it to be polite, and I noticed, he continued smoothly. Second date was a drive along the coast. Third date, you stayed over. Not scandalous, but established intimacy. My throat went dry. Stayed over how? He met my eyes steadily. Implied intimacy, not explicit. Adults in a relationship. We don't discuss details. We don't deny them either. I nodded slowly. That made sense. It was safer to let people assume than to fabricate specifics. You're not a naive girl swept off her feet, Bruno went on. You're cautious. You challenged me. You didn't trust me at first. That's important. It explains why you don't gush, why you don't cling. It makes the relationship believable. He slid another page toward me. A timeline. Dates, places, overlapping with my real life just enough to be plausible. You kept your apartment, he said. You don't live with me yet. We've discussed it, but you're not ready. I respect that. This makes you look independent, not kept. A sharp, unexpected gratitude flickered through me. He could have written me as an accessory. Instead, he was building me as a person. And why do your associates care so much whether you're settled? I asked. Bruno leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Because men like me are unpredictable when we're alone. A woman in my life signals stability. It suggests I have something to lose. And do you? The question slipped out before I could stop it. His gaze held mine, unreadable. That depends. He pushed the laptop toward me and opened a file. Now, this is the most important part. How you behave around them. You don't flirt excessively. You don't challenge them directly. You listen. You ask questions that make them feel intelligent. And when you speak, you do it with confidence, but sparingly. So, decorative but not stupid, I said. His mouth curved. Exactly. Men like this are threatened by women who are either too sharp or too submissive. You walk the line. I exhaled slowly. And with you? With me, he said quietly. You're different. How? You interrupt me. You disagree when it matters. You don't apologize unless you mean it. And you never ask for permission to exist. The words landed heavier than I expected. They sounded less like instructions and more like encouragement. He stood and moved around the table, stopping beside me. Not touching. Just close enough that I was aware of his warmth, the faint scent of espresso and something darker beneath. One more rule, he said. In private, you can be angry. You can be scared. You can tell me when this feels like too much. But in public, you're calm, unbothered, as if you've always belonged at my side. I looked up at him. And if I don't feel like I belong? Then, he said evenly, you pretend until you do, or until the weekend ends. Either way, you are not small. You are not indebted. You are choosing to be here. I searched his face for mockery or manipulation and found neither. What I saw instead was intent. Control, yes, but also clarity. Okay, I said finally. Teach me how to be your girlfriend. A flicker of something, satisfaction maybe, passed through his eyes. Good, Bruno said. Then let's start with the hardest lesson. He leaned down slightly, voice low. Look at me like you trust me. Not because you do, but because everyone else must believe you do. My pulse thudded in my ears. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted my gaze and met his. I let the fear settle, then pushed past it, summoning the version of myself that had raised a paddle I couldn't afford and refused to flinch. Something shifted between us. Subtle, electric. Bruno straightened, exhaling softly. Yes, he murmured. That look will convince anyone. And for the first time since the auction, I realized something unsettling and dangerous. I wasn't just learning how to survive his world. I was learning how easily I could belong in it. She's perceptive and bored, Bruno went on, which makes her dangerous. She enjoys poking at people to see what falls out. Don't rise to it. If she teases you, smile and deflect. If she compliments you, accept it without false modesty. I'm sensing a theme, I said dryly. Everyone in your life is terrifying in a different way. A corner of his mouth lifted. You adapt quickly. He closed the folder and looked at me properly for the first time since we'd started. Really looked. Not as a strategist assessing an asset, but as a man taking stock of a woman sitting across from him. You're overwhelmed, he said. Yes, I replied immediately. And slightly offended that you think I can absorb an entire fictional relationship, a powerful family dynamic, and your personal mythology in a week. I don't think, he corrected. I know. That should have irritated me. Instead, it made something warm and defiant stir in my chest. You assume a lot, I said. I base assumptions on evidence. He gestured toward me. You rebuilt a career after being financially erased. You walked into a room full of powerful people and outbid a man who humiliated you, knowing it would cost you. You negotiated with me, successfully, despite being terrified. Those aren't the actions of a woman who breaks under pressure. Silence stretched between us, thick and charged. "Don't flatter me," I said quietly. "It blurs boundaries." "I'm not flattering you. I'm calibrating expectations." He stood and moved toward the window, looking out over the bay. "Amalfi won't be the hardest part," he added. "The hardest part will be here. This week. Learning how to exist in proximity without mistaking intensity for intimacy." I frowned. "You think I'll confuse the two?" "I think most people do." He turned back to me. "And I think you're starved for validation in a way you don't fully recognize yet, which makes you vulnerable. Not to me, but to what this arrangement represents." "And what does it represent?" I asked. "A version of yourself who isn't dismissed, who isn't diminished, who is taken seriously." The truth of it hit too close to the bone. "So what's your plan?" I asked softly. "Protect me from myself?" "No," he said. "I don't believe in protection without consent. My plan is transparency. You always know where you stand. You always know what I want. And you always get to say no." He walked back to the table and rested his hands on the surface, leaning in just enough that his presence pressed against my awareness. "You language," he clarified calmly. "Affection without desperation. Familiarity without ownership. It's subtle, but it's everything." My pulse spiked. "And you're going to teach me that how, exactly?" A slow, dangerous smile curved his mouth. "By example," he said, "and by correction." I leaned back in my chair, suddenly very aware that agreeing to this deal hadn't just pulled me into Bruno Fontana's world. It had placed me directly in his orbit, and whether I liked it or not, gravity was already doing its work. Bruno held my gaze steadily. "I don't punish people for honest failure. That's not how I operate. You're not a hostage, Claudia. You're a collaborator. If this doesn't work, I absorb the loss." The fact that he said it so simply, no threat, no manipulation, was almost more unsettling than if he'd tried to scare me. "And you?" I asked. "What do you lose if this fails?" Something unreadable crossed his face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "Momentum," he said. "Credibility and time, none of which are easily replaced." He stood, signaling an end to the briefing, and carried his plate to the kitchen. The movement was unhurried, domestic in a way that clashed with everything else about him. I followed, unsure whether I was supposed to help or simply stay out of the way. "You can clear your plate," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Or you can sit. I don't test people with fake etiquette rules." I cleared my plate, partly out of defiance, partly because I needed something ordinary to do with my hands. "So," I said, setting it beside the sink, "you grew up poor, clawed your way into power, and now need a respectable girlfriend to reassure other powerful men you won't burn their money to the ground." "That's the simplified version," he replied. "Yes." "And you chose me because I'm authentic desperation?" He turned, leaning back against the counter. "You chose yourself first. I just recognized it." I folded my arms. "You realize this whole thing could backfire on you." A slow smile. Everything worth having can. There it was again. That dangerous, magnetic confidence that didn't ask permission and didn't seek approval. It wasn't arrogance exactly. It was certainty. "And what about me?" I pressed. "What do I get besides a clear debt and temporary proximity to power?" Bruno considered that genuinely. "Perspective," he said finally. "You'll see how power actually works. Not the sanitized version people like your ex sell in pitch decks. The real version: networks, leverage, silence, timing." "That sounds like a threat disguised as a benefit." "No," he said. "It's education. Whether you use it later is your choice." I let out a slow breath. "You're very confident I won't regret this." "I'm confident you already would regret walking away," he countered gently. "You didn't raise that paddle because you wanted safety. You raised it because you were tired of shrinking." The words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. "Fine," I said. "Then let's be clear about something else. I'll play your girlfriend. I'll learn the script. I'll smile at your mother and deflect your sister. But I don't disappear into this role. I don't become decorative or obedient or silent." His eyes sharpened. not with anger but interest. "Good," he said. "I'd fire you if you did." I blinked. "Fire me?" "This is a job," he reminded me, "and I don't hire people who erase themselves." Silence stretched, not tense this time, but charged with a new understanding. "Change of plans for the afternoon," Bruno added. "We'll skip shopping today. Instead, we're going somewhere public, somewhere uncomfortable." "Why?" "Because I need to see how you perform under observation," he said. "And you need to get used to walking beside me without flinching." He picked up his jacket, already moving toward the door. "Get your bag. We're going to a cafe where half the city's political class pretends to be casual." I hesitated only a second before following him. As I stepped into the elevator beside Bruno Fontana, dangerous, powerful, infuriatingly perceptive, I understood something with sudden clarity. This wasn't just a favor. It wasn't even just a gamble. It was an initiation. And whether I emerged from it unchanged, empowered, or completely undone depended not on him, but on how much of myself I was willing to bring into the fire. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "I don't hold people responsible for outcomes they can't control. If you do your best and it's not enough, that's on me for making a poor choice. But I don't think you'll fail, Claudia. I think you're far more capable than you give yourself credit for." The confidence in his voice was seductive. He believed in me in a way that no one had in years. Not Marco, not my sister, not even my colleagues, who saw only the carefully constructed professional facade I presented. "Why?" I asked. "Why do you believe in me?" "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you raised your hand and made an impossible bid to prove a point. I know you negotiated with me when you had zero leverage. I know you're sitting here right now, scared but not showing it, preparing to enter a world you don't understand because you're too stubborn to admit defeat. That tells me everything. I need to know about your character." He poured more wine, the gesture casual, despite the intensity of the conversation. "Besides, I'm good at reading people. It's how I've survived in my world for this long. And when I look at you, I see someone who's been underestimated her entire life, someone much stronger and smarter than anyone has given her credit for. That's valuable to me. The compliments shouldn't have affected me. They were probably just manipulation, another tool to ensure my compliance. But I felt them anyway, felt something warm and dangerous unfurl in my chest. "Tell me about your wife," I said, needing to change the subject, before I did something stupid, like believe him. Bruno's expression shuddered. "I've never been married. The auction program said, this was your first public date in 3 years. What happened 3 years ago?" For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, refilling his wineglass. "Her name was Elena. We were engaged. She died in a car accident 2 weeks before the wedding. Someone cut the brake lines." The casual way he delivered that last sentence made my blood run cold. Someone murdered her? Someone murdered her to hurt me, to send a message that I wasn't untouchable, that the people I loved could be used against me. It worked. I've kept my distance from serious relationships ever since. He met my eyes, and I saw pain there that he usually kept hidden. So when I promise, you'll be safe with me. Understand that I've learned how to protect what's mine. Elena died because I was careless. I won't make that mistake again. The revelation cast everything in a different light. This wasn't just about business deals and public perception. This was about a man who had lost someone he loved to violence, who had spent 3 years avoiding attachment because he knew what it cost. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "That must have been devastating." "It was educational," Bruno said, his voice hardening. "It taught me that sentimentality is a weakness, that caring about people makes you vulnerable, that power means nothing if you can't protect what matters. Is that why you've stayed alone? Because it's safer? Safer for them. Safer for me." He stood abruptly, moving to the window to look out over the bay. "This arrangement works, precisely because it's temporary, because you're not actually mine, to protect beyond this limited time frame. In 2 weeks, you'll walk away, and no one will have any reason to use you against me." It should have been reassuring, proof that he wasn't trying to trap me into something permanent. Instead, I felt oddly disappointed, which was insane. I didn't want to be with Bruno Fontana long term. I didn't want to be part of his dangerous world. This was just a transaction, a way to clear a debt. and move on with my life. What was she like? I asked. Elena. Bruno was quiet for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, strong. Stubborn. She came from a family like mine. Understood the rules and the risks. We grew up together. Were friends before we were anything else. Everyone expected us to marry eventually. And when I finally proposed, it felt right, like the natural conclusion to a story that had been writing itself for years. You loved her. I did. Not in some passionate, overwhelming way, but steadily, comfortably. She would have been a good wife, a good partner. And then she was gone, and I realized how foolish I'd been to think I could have that kind of normal life. He turned back to me, and his expression was unreadable. So yes, this arrangement is temporary by design, because I won't make the mistake of caring about someone enough that losing them destroys me, or worse, gets them killed. The pain beneath his words was palpable. This wasn't a man who had moved on from grief. This was a man who had buried it under layers of control and calculation, convinced himself that isolation was safety. That's a lonely way to live, I said. Lonely is survivable. Grief is not. He moved back to the table, collecting the folders we'd been reviewing. But we're not here to discuss my emotional damage. We're here to prepare you for a role. Let's continue. We spent the rest of the afternoon on details. Bruno taught me how to read his moods, what phrases signaled his irritation or approval, how to navigate conversations with the kind of people who populated his world. He was a patient teacher, correcting me gently when I made mistakes, praising me when I got something right. By the time evening arrived, I was exhausted, mentally drained, from absorbing so much information, emotionally wrung out, from spending hours in close proximity to a man who was both fascinating and frightening. That's enough for today, Bruno finally said, checking his watch. Gabriella left dinner in the refrigerator. Lasagna, I think. Heat it up, eat, rest. Tomorrow we start earlier, 6 a.m. 6 a.m., I protested. I'm not a morning person. You are now. In my world, business happens early. You need to adjust. He grabbed a jacket from the coat rack near the door. I have meetings tonight. Don't wait up. The guest bedroom is down that hall. Second door on the left. Everything you need should be there. You're leaving? I felt suddenly anxious at the prospect of being alone in this unfamiliar apartment. I have work, Claudia. This arrangement doesn't exempt me from my other responsibilities. He paused at the door. The apartment is secure. No one can enter without the code. You're safe here. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the cavernous space. I explored tentatively, finding the guest bedroom he'd mentioned. It was beautiful. A king-sized bed with soft linens, an ensuite bathroom, with a deep soaking tub, a closet where Gabriella had already unpacked my meager belongings. I heated the lasagna, ate mechanically, while looking out at the city lights, and then drew a bath. The hot water helped ease some of the tension from my shoulders, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept replaying the day, the hours of preparation, Bruno's revelations about Elena, the growing awareness that this situation was far more complex than a simple transaction. He had been engaged, had loved someone, had lost her to violence, meant to hurt him, and now he was constructing elaborate defenses to ensure it never happened again, including this temporary arrangement that kept me at a safe emotional distance while still serving his purposes. I should have found it cold, calculating. Instead, I found it tragic. I was in bed by 10, exhausted but unable to sleep. The apartment was too quiet, too large, too full of Bruno's presence. Even in his absence, I finally drifted off. Sometime after midnight, only to be jolted awake by the sound of the front door opening. I grabbed my phone. 2:47 a.m. I heard footsteps, the sound of keys being dropped on the entry table, and water running in the kitchen. Bruno had returned. I should have stayed in bed, should have pretended to sleep through his return. Instead, I found myself padding down the hallway, in my pajamas, drawn by curiosity and something else I didn't want to examine too closely. Bruno stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His shirt was untucked, his tie discarded, and there was blood on his knuckles. "You're awake," he said, not turning around. I heard you come in. I moved closer, my eyes fixed on his injured hand. What happened? Work. What kind of work? Leaves you bleeding. At 3 a.m? The kind you don't need to know about. But he didn't move away. When I took his hand, examining the split knuckles, you need to clean this. It's fine. It's not fine. Where's your first aid kit? He gestured toward a cabinet, and I found a well-stocked medical kit, extensive enough to tell its own story about the kind of injuries Bruno regularly sustained. I cleaned his knuckles with antiseptic, and he didn't flinch, despite what must have been painful. This isn't from falling downstairs, I said quietly, wrapping gauze around his hand. No, it's from explaining to someone why they shouldn't have stolen from me. The explanation required physical emphasis. He said it so matter-of-factly, as if violence were just another communication tool. You beat someone up, I said, finishing the bandage. I corrected a misunderstanding. There's a difference. He flexed his hand, testing the wrap. You don't need to worry about this, Claudia. This is the part of my life you won't see during our arrangement. But it's still there. Still part of who you are. Yes. Does that frighten you? I considered the question honestly. It should. But mostly it just makes me sad. Sad? Bruno looked genuinely puzzled. Why sad? Because you're intelligent and cultured, and clearly capable of building legitimate businesses. But you choose violence because it's what you know, what you've always known. That's tragic. I choose violence because it's effective. Bruno corrected. And because in my world, showing weakness gets you killed. But I appreciate your concern. He took a drink of his whiskey. You should go back to bed. Tomorrow will be demanding. Bruno, I said, not moving. What am I really doing here? Why did you really choose me? For this arrangement? He studied me for a long moment, those dark eyes unreadable. Do you want the truth? Or the comfortable lie? The truth. Always the truth. The truth is that when I saw you raise that paddle, I saw something I recognized. Desperation disguised as confidence. The willingness to burn everything down, rather than show weakness. I've made plenty of decisions like that. Impulsive, dangerous, impossible to take back. And I thought, here is someone who understands what it means to bet everything on a single moment. He set down his glass and moved closer until I could smell whiskey and cologne and something darker. Blood maybe, or gunpowder. The truth is that I needed someone for this role, yes. But I also wanted to see what would happen if I took that desperate, defiant woman and gave her power. Would she thrive? Would she break? Would she become something else entirely? That interested me, more than any business deal. So I'm an experiment, I said, trying to decide. If I was offended, you're a mystery I'm solving. There's a difference. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing along my cheekbone, in a gesture that was becoming dangerously familiar. And the more I solve, the more interesting you become. I should have stepped back, should have reminded him, and myself, that this was supposed to be professional, temporary, safe. Instead, I leaned into his touch, and I saw something flare in his eyes. Heat, want, the same thing I felt burning in my own chest. This is a bad idea, I whispered. Terrible, Bruno agreed. But he was leaning closer, and I was rising on my toes to meet him. And when his lips finally touched mine, it felt inevitable, like every moment since I'd raised that paddle had been leading to this. The kiss started gently, but quickly turned fierce. Bruno's hands moved to my waist, pulling me against him, and I felt the leash strength in his body, the careful control he maintained even now. My own hands found his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt. He tasted like whiskey, and danger, and something indefinable that made my head spin. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bruno rested his forehead against mine. We should stop, he said, his voice rough. Yes, I agreed, but I didn't move away. This complicates everything. I know. In 2 weeks, this ends. You walk away. That doesn't change. I know that too. His hands tightened on my waist. Then why does this feel like the start of something, rather than a momentary lapse? In judgment? I don't know, I admitted. But maybe we don't have to figure it out tonight. Bruno pulled back, putting necessary distance between us. You're right. Go to bed, Claudia. We'll pretend this didn't happen and maintain professional boundaries in the future. Okay, I said, even though we both knew it was a lie. Something had shifted between us, and there was no going back to the careful distance we'd maintained before. I returned to my bedroom, but sleep was impossible. I could still feel the imprint of his hands on my waist, the taste of his kiss on my lips. I had just kissed Bruno Fontana, had wanted him with an intensity that frightened me, had felt, for those few moments, like I belonged exactly where I was, which was insane. I didn't belong in his world. I didn't belong with a man who came home at 3 a.m. with bloody knuckles and spoke casually about violence. This was temporary, a transaction, and I needed to remember that. But when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of dark eyes and dangerous promises, and I woke up wanting more. The next morning, Bruno woke me at precisely 6 a.m. by knocking on my door. 15 minutes, he called. We're going running. I don't run, I called back. You do now. Dress appropriately and meet me in the living room. I dragged myself out of bed, found the athletic clothes Gabriella had packed, and stumbled into the living room to find Bruno already stretching. He wore running shorts and a fitted shirt that showed off the lean muscle of his arms and shoulders. If he was tired from his late night, it didn't show. We ran along the waterfront. As the city woke up around us, I struggled to keep pace. My fitness regimen for the past year had consisted of walking to the bus stop and occasionally taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Bruno adjusted his speed to match mine, patient but relentless. Why are we doing this? I gasped after the first kilometer. Because you need to know my routines, and because physical exertion clears the mind. After last night, we both need clarity, so we were acknowledging what had happened. That was something at least. We ran for an hour, and by the time we returned to the apartment, my legs were shaking, and I was covered in sweat. But I also felt strangely energized, more awake and alert than I'd been in months. Shower, then breakfast, Bruno said. We have shopping this morning, and lunch with some associates this afternoon. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet my mother. Your mother? I stopped in my tracks. Already? She's heard about you. She's demanding to meet the woman I'm bringing to Amalfi. Better to control the narrative early than let her imagination run wild. The thought of meeting Bruno's mother, a woman who apparently had concrete ideas about grandchildren and appropriate partners for her son, made my stomach twist with anxiety. What do I say to her? The truth mostly. That we met at an auction. That you work in consulting. That you're educated and independent. She'll respect that. More than false modesty. He paused. She'll also ask intrusive questions about your intentions and your family. Just be honest. My mother has excellent instincts for deception. After showering and changing into one of the elegant dresses Gabriella had selected, I joined Bruno for breakfast. He had prepared everything himself. Fresh cornetti from the bakery downstairs, espresso, fruit prosciutto, and cheese. You cook? I asked, surprised. I live alone. Of course I cook. Did you think I survived on restaurant food and takeout? I thought you had staff for that. I have staff for many things, but cooking relaxes me, gives me something to control in a life where many things are beyond my control. He poured my coffee with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Besides, Elena taught me. She said a man who couldn't feed himself was half a man. The casual mention of his dead fiancée sent a pang through my chest. I wondered if he thought of her often, if every domestic gesture reminded him of what he'd lost. Tell me about her, I said. About Elena. Bruno was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into his coffee. Why do you want to know? Because if I'm going to play the role of your girlfriend, I should understand who came before me, what you lost, what you're protecting yourself from. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Elena was practical. She understood the world we lived in, the rules and expectations. Our engagement wasn't some grand romance. It was a logical partnership between families, but we cared for each other, respected each other. That should have been enough. But I wonder sometimes if she would have been happy. If the life I could offer, the danger, the secrets, the constant vigilance, would have eventually broken her. Maybe her death saved her from years of unhappiness. Or maybe she loved you and would have chosen that life willingly, I said softly. You'll never know now. That's the tragedy. Bruno's eyes met mine, and I saw something raw there. Grief, yes, but also guilt. He blamed himself for her death, even 3 years later. Does it get easier? I asked. The grief? No, you get better at carrying it. He stood, collecting our plates. We should go. The shop's open in 20 minutes, and I have specific ideas about what you'll need for Amalfi. Shopping with Bruno Fontana was an experience unlike anything I'd ever encountered. We didn't go to regular stores where you could browse and try things on. Instead, Bruno led me to exclusive boutiques where the doors were locked until he knocked, and where sales associates greeted him by name and brought champagne while presenting options. At the first shop, a willowy woman named Francesca pulled out dress after dress, elegant cocktail attire, casual resort wear, evening gowns that made my breath catch. The green, Bruno said, pointing to a silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. And the black one. Both. I can't accept. I started. You can and you will. This isn't about you, Claudia. This is about presentation. When you walk into a room with me, people will judge you instantly. Your clothes need to send a message. This woman belongs. This woman is confident. This woman is not impressed by your wealth because she has her own. It was the same logic he'd used for everything. Appearance as strategy, presentation as power. And despite my discomfort at being dressed like a doll, I understood the reasoning. By the time we left the third boutique, I had accumulated an entire wardrobe, clothes for every possible situation, shoes that felt like clouds, jewelry that sparkled under the shop lights. Bruno paid for everything, without looking at the prices, dismissing my protests with a wave of his hand. Consider it costuming for a performance, he said. As we loaded bags into his car, actors don't pay for their own wardrobe. I'm not an actor. For the next week and a half, you absolutely are. He opened my door, waiting until I was settled, before closing it gently. And you're going to be brilliant. Lunch was at an elegant restaurant, overlooking the marina, and Bruno's associates turned out to be 3 middle-aged men who looked like successful business people, but carried themselves with the same dangerous awareness. Bruno had, "Gentlemen, this is Claudia Rossi," Bruno said, his hand possessive, on my lower back. "Claudia, this is Antonio, Marco, and Giuseppe, old friends." "It's a pleasure," I said, shaking hands with each of them. They studied me with unconcealed interest, not sexual, but assessing, trying to determine what kind of woman had captured Bruno Fontana's attention. "So you're the one who finally got Bruno to settle down," Antonio said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. We were beginning to think he'd sworn off women entirely after Elena. The mention of Elena was deliberate, a test, to see how I'd react. "Bruno told me about her," I said calmly. "What happened was a tragedy, but I'm not trying to replace her or compete with her memory. I'm just trying to build something new with him, something different." "Different how?" Giuseppe asked. "Different because I don't come from your world. I'm not part of the families. Don't understand the politics or the histories. That gives me a certain objectivity. I can see Bruno clearly, rather than through the lens of expectations or obligations." It was a good answer, one Bruno and I had rehearsed that morning, but I delivered it with enough sincerity that even I almost believed it. The men exchanged glances, and I saw Bruno's nearly imperceptible nod of approval. I had passed the first test. The lunch continued, with a conversation that danced around topics without ever addressing them directly. Business was discussed. In metaphors, shipments, agreements, and territory negotiations that could have meant anything or nothing. I listened more than I spoke, taking my cues from Bruno's body language and learning the rhythms of this world, where everything was coded and nothing was explicit. By the time we left the restaurant, I was exhausted from the mental effort of maintaining the performance, but Bruno seemed pleased. "You did well," he said. As we drove back to the apartment, Antonio in particular was impressed. "He's the most skeptical of the three, and you won him over. How could you tell? He invited us to his daughter's wedding next month. He wouldn't do that if he thought you were temporary or unsuitable." Bruno glanced at me. "Of course, we won't actually attend. By then, our arrangement will be over, but the invitation itself signals acceptance. The reminder that this was temporary should have been welcome. Instead, it felt like cold water on something warm that had been growing between us." "Right," I said. "Temporary. I keep forgetting." "Do you?" Bruno's voice was sharp. "Because I'm not forgetting. I'm very aware that in 10 days, you'll walk away and we'll return to being strangers. That's the agreement." "I know that's the agreement. I'm just saying, it's easy to get lost in the performance, to forget where the acting ends and reality begins." Bruno was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, it is easy to forget, which is why we need to maintain boundaries. Last night was a mistake. It can't happen again." "Agreed?" I said, even though every cell in my body disagreed. We spent the rest of the drive in silence, and when we reached the apartment, Bruno excused himself to his office for business calls. I was left alone with my shopping bags and my confused feelings, wondering how I had gotten myself into this situation. That evening, Bruno emerged from his office, looking tense. "Change of plans," he said. "We're going to dinner. My mother insists on meeting you tonight, rather than tomorrow. She's impatient." "Tonight?" I looked down at my casual clothes. "I'm not ready. You have an entire closet, full of appropriate clothes now. The blue dress from this morning. Hair down, minimal jewelry. My mother doesn't trust women who try too hard." 30 minutes later, I was dressed and terrified. We drove to an elegant home in Posillipo, perched on a cliff with views of the bay that took my breath away. The house was beautiful, but felt lived in. Flowers in the windows, comfortable furniture, family photographs on every surface. Maria Fontana opened the door herself. She was exactly as Bruno had described, elegant, traditional, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She embraced her son warmly, then turned those assessing eyes on me. "So you're Claudia," she said in Italian. "The woman my son has been hiding from me." "I haven't been hiding her." "Mama," Bruno protested. "We've been private." "There's a difference. Private means you're ashamed." "Are you ashamed of her, Bruno?" "No, Mama. I'm proud of her. That's why I'm bringing her to Amalfi next weekend." Maria studied me for another long moment, then smiled. Come in. Dinner is ready, and I want to know everything about the woman who's finally made my son. Think about something other than business." Dinner was both wonderful and terrifying. Maria was warm and welcoming, but her questions were relentless. Where was I from? What did my parents do? Was I close to my family? Did I want children? When Bruno and I discussed marriage, what were my expectations about his career? I answered as honestly as I could, sticking to the script Bruno and I had developed, but infusing it with enough real emotion to feel genuine. And slowly, I felt Maria warming to me. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. As we finished dessert, Bruno usually chooses women who are decorative, beautiful but empty. You have substance, intelligence. That's good. Thank you, Signora Fontana. Call me Maria. If you're going to be part of this family, we should use first names. She looked at her son. You've chosen well, Bruno. Better than I thought you would. After Elena. Claudia is nothing like Elena, Bruno said carefully. That's not a criticism of either of them. They're just different people. Different is good. Elena was perfect for you 10 years ago. But you're not the same man. You were then. You need someone stronger. Someone who won't break under the pressure of your world. Maria reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I think Claudia might be strong enough. The approval in her voice made my chest tighten with guilt. This woman was accepting me, welcoming me into her family, and it was all based on a lie. In 10 days, I would disappear from Bruno's life, and Maria would think I had abandoned her son. The thought made me feel sick. On the drive back to the apartment, Bruno seemed pleased. That went better than expected. My mother liked you. That's rare. I feel terrible, I admitted. She was so kind, so welcoming, and we're lying to her. We're protecting her, Bruno corrected. If she knew this was temporary, she'd worry. She'd ask questions. This way, she hopes I'm moving forward with my life. In a few months, when we break up, she'll be sad, but not devastated. It's kinder this way. Is it? Or are we just rationalizing our deception? Bruno pulled into the building's garage and turned off the engine, but didn't move to get out. You're thinking too much about the morality of this. That's not helpful. I'm sorry if my conscience is inconvenient for you. It's not inconvenient. It's dangerous. If you start feeling guilty, you'll telegraph that guilt. People will sense something's wrong. You need to commit fully to this role, or it won't work. I am committed, I said, frustration rising. But that doesn't mean I'm comfortable lying to your mother, or your friends, or anyone else. I'm not like you, Bruno. I can't just turn off my emotions and treat people like chess pieces. And what do you think your ex-husband did to you? Bruno's voice was sharp. He treated you like a chess piece, used you, discarded you, and moved on, without guilt. The difference between him and me is that I'm honest about what I'm doing. You know this is temporary. You agreed to it. Don't pretend you're some innocent victim. His words stung because they were true. I had agreed to this. I was being compensated for my performance. I had no right to suddenly develop a conscience about the arrangement. You're right, I said quietly. I'm sorry. I agreed to this, and I'll honor it. No more complaints about the morality of it. Bruno's expression softened slightly. I'm not saying you can't have feelings about it. I'm saying you can't let those feelings compromise the performance. Can you do that? Yes, I can do that. We went upstairs, in silence, and I headed straight for my bedroom, needing space and time to process everything that had happened. But Bruno caught my wrist as I passed him in the hallway. Claudia, wait. I turned, and the intensity in his dark eyes made my breath catch. What you said in the car about not being like me, not being able to turn off emotions, that's not true. You're more like me than you think. That's why this works. That's why I chose you. His hand came up to cup my face, the gesture becoming familiar, despite my attempts to maintain distance. And that's why I can't stop thinking about last night, about kissing you, about wanting to do it again, even though I know I shouldn't. Bruno, I started, but he cut me off. I know. This is temporary. This complicates everything. This is a terrible idea, for a dozen different reasons. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching mine. But I'm not going to pretend. I don't want you. I'm not going to lie about that. So please tell me now. Is this just professional for you? Tell me if what happened last night meant nothing. Because if it did mean nothing, I'll stop. I'll maintain perfect boundaries. And we'll finish this arrangement, exactly as planned. My heart was racing. I should have said yes. It meant nothing. I think we should keep this professional. That would have been the wise choice. The safe choice. Instead, I said, it meant something. I don't know what yet, but it meant something. Bruno's eyes darkened with heat. And something else. Relief, maybe. Or satisfaction. That I'm not letting you back out. Not from this. Whatever's happening between us, we're going to see it through. For the next 10 days, you're mine. Not just for appearances, not just for the role, actually mine. And when it ends, when you walk away, at least it will be real. At least we'll know what we were walking away from. That's going to make everything more complicated, I whispered. I know. Do you care? I thought about the past week, about Marco's shocked face, when I made that impossible bid, about Bruno's hand on my back, claiming me in front of everyone, about the way he looked at me, like I was valuable, interesting, worth protecting, about his kiss, his touch, the way he made me feel alive, in a way I hadn't felt in years. No, I admitted. I don't care about complicated anymore. Good. Bruno smiled. That rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Then stop fighting this. Stop overthinking. For the next 10 days, be with me. Be mine. Let yourself want what you want without apologizing for it. And after 10 days? After 10 days, we'll figure it out. Maybe this burns out naturally, and we part as friends. Maybe it becomes something neither of us expected. I don't have all the answers, Claudia. I know that I'm not walking away from this, from you, without exploring what it could be. He kissed me then, and it was different. From the first time, less desperate, more deliberate, a promise. Instead of an accident, I melted into it, my hands finding his shoulders, his hair, pulling him closer. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bruno's eyes were dark with want. Your room or mine? Yours, I said, making the choice, stepping fully into this dangerous, temporary, impossible thing between us. He took my hand and led me down the hall to the main bedroom, a space I hadn't seen yet. It was elegant and masculine, all dark wood and crisp linens, with those same floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the bay. Last chance to change your mind, Bruno said, his hands framing my face. Once this happens, there's no going back to professional distance. We'll be in this together, whatever this becomes. I don't want to go back, I said. I'm tired of being careful, tired of protecting myself from everything. For once in my life, I want to be reckless. I want to choose something dangerous just because I want it. I want to choose you. Bruno's smile was both tender and fierce. Then you're mine. For the next 10 days, for whatever comes after, I'm not letting you back out. I know, I said, pulling him down for another kiss. That's what I'm counting on. And as he lowered me onto his bed, as his hands and mouth began mapping my body with focused intensity, I realized that somewhere between that impulsive auction bid and this moment, I had stopped pretending. I had stopped performing. I had fallen for Bruno Fontana. Dangerous, complicated, impossible Bruno. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't afraid of what that meant. I was ready to see where this reckless choice would take me. Even if it destroyed me in the end, at least I would have chosen it. At least I would have been brave enough to reach for something I wanted, instead of settling for what felt safe. The script of my careful, controlled life had been torn up the moment I raised that paddle. Now I was writing a new one. And Bruno Fontana was my co-author. Whatever happened next, it would be real. And that was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely worth the risk.